Welcome to Being a Science Advocate, building and maintaining relationships with decision makers to impact policy. In this presentation, we will have a quick overview of Congress and the legislative process, then move into ways that you can have an impact on that process, and we'll finish with tips and suggestions for communicating with leaders and policymakers so your issues are heard. Let's start with the way our government is set up. Our Constitution ensures that there is distributed power amongst the three branches of government: the executive, the judicial, and the legislative. With a system of checks and balances, each branch has the power and the authority to challenge the other two. The executive branch is headed by the president, and their responsibility is to carry out the laws. The judicial branch is headed by the Supreme Court, and they review the laws. And the legislative branch is headed by Congress, which is the House of Representatives and the Senate collectively, and they make all the federal laws. With the House and the Senate, that's 535 members of Congress doing the work to govern 325 million citizens. A daunting task, to be sure. So how do they distribute the workload? Both the House and the Senate use a committee structure to allocate work. The committee structure system exists to allow Congress to break down the work across a manageable spectrum of people. It means that not every member has to be an expert on everything. Every committee has its own jurisdiction, its own part of the government that it's responsible for. And each full committee is further broken down into subcommittees. Subcommittees focus on the specific part of the full committee's jurisdiction, and subcommittees handle the initial consideration of every bill. Every member of Congress has a committee assignment, and oftentimes more than one. Sometimes their committee assignment pertains to what they did prior to joining Congress, and sometimes these positions are the result of seniority and rank within their party. And this is why it's important. It's the committee assignments that give more power and control to the member. This is the area of government that they have the most impact on. But what do you do if your congressperson or senator doesn't sit on a relevant committee for your interest? Not to worry. Keep in mind they're still very important. Every member of Congress has the opportunity to have a say on each piece of legislation that passes their chamber. They will ultimately vote on every bill, and they're interested in how that vote will be received back home. Additionally, every member can sponsor or co-sponsor legislation. They can make appropriations requests. They can sign on to Dear Colleague letters to push bills or issues. They can meet with other members from their state who might be on that committee that's of concern to you. And finally, they can make floor statements and vote on the bill when it comes to the floor. But what kinds of legislation are they creating and supporting? Congress's main job is to legislate. And the two major types of legislation are authorization bills and appropriation bills. Authorizing legislation is a bill that creates a new federal program, extends the life of an existing program, or repeals an existing law. Authorizing bills establish the framework for a federal program and the guidelines over a 3 to 5 year period. It does not provide the funds to operate this program. An appropriations bill is a bill that allocates funding for specific federal programs. And unlike authorizing legislation, which remains in effect for 2 or more years, an appropriation bill must be enacted into law every year. Each year, in fact, Congress must pass a series of appropriation bills to keep the federal departments and agencies operating. There's also an opportunity for the President and the administration to issue something called an executive order. Executive orders are issued to agencies and have the full force of law, but they are not public laws. They are generally used to direct federal agencies in their execution of congressionally established policies, but they have in recent administrations been used to guide agencies in directions that are contrary to congressional intent. Every president has issued executive orders from George Washington onwards. Executive orders are not laws. It's important to remember that. They can be overturned by a following president or administration. So let's take a deeper look at appropriation bills, the ones that give money to agencies to fulfill their obligations. It's important to note that Congress controls the purse strings. The Constitution vests Congress with the authority to appropriate funds and direct the Treasury to disperse those funds. The annual President's budget request can indicate priorities for that administration and suggest spending direction, but in the balance of power, the President suggests and Congress decides. This allows the opportunity to check spending increases or decreases and ensure a balanced spending plan. Congress determines what can be spent in a given year based on the information from the U.S. Treasury and the Congressional Budget Office. This gives them the expected revenues to set top-line expenditures for the 12 agencies that make up our federal government. Both the House and the Senate agreed to a budget resolution and then provide allocations for each agency to determine how to best spend those funds. Congress holds hearings on annual appropriations fundings, giving agency heads and the public the opportunity to weigh in on spending priority and needs. Each chamber, House and Senate, pass their version of an appropriations bill, then come together to work out the differences before ultimately sending the bill to the President for signature into law. This process must be done every year. Appropriations are only good for a single fiscal year. And the other type of legislation that we focus on is authorizing legislation. This is a bill that establishes or continues federal agencies and programs. They're typically multi-year bills that can cover a range of 2 to 5 years, although some programs can be permanently reauthorized. They do not allocate the funds to do the actual work. They can provide top-line amounts that they wish would be appropriated, but that's not necessarily what will be granted and dispersed by the Treasury. Examples of authorizing legislation are the National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Act and the National Landslides Preparedness Act. These bills provide direction to federal agencies to address societal problems around natural disasters. They outline expectations and deliverables from those agencies, and they provide a suggested level of funding for the agencies to pursue that work. There is a general budget process that the executive branch and Congress go through. We run on a fiscal year that spans October 1st to September 30th. And each February, about 4 months into the current fiscal year, the President releases a budget request for the upcoming fiscal year. That's to give Congress the time it needs to review and deliberate on the President's request. Congress then proposes a budget resolution that sets the spending targets and expected revenues for the upcoming year, and then gives each of the 12 appropriations subcommittees a level of funding that can be used for discretionary spending. After that, the subcommittee process begins. When everything runs according to plan, the next year's budget is agreed to, passed, and signed into law prior to the end of the current fiscal year. If not, Congress typically passes a continuing resolution, which allows the government and agencies to continue operating at last year's level of funding. A continuing resolution does not allow for new programs to start or for any spending that was not previously approved to occur. If a continuing resolution is not agreed to, then we have a government shutdown until such time as either the budget is passed or a continuing resolution is passed. Okay, so now we know what Congress does and how they're supposed to do it. How can we possibly influence what's going on? Well, there are 2 main ways to get the attention of Congress and impact their outcomes: advocacy and lobbying. Now, the goals of advocacy and lobbying are similar, but the processes are different. Advocacy is attempting to cause political action using methods such as civil education, public campaigns, or outreach, with the aim to change public opinion, garner public support, or influence decision makers. The advocacy strategy can include activities such as articles in newspapers or op-eds, stories about how an individual or group was helped or has benefited from an action or law, or stories about the negative impacts of an existing or proposed law. It can also include the distribution of promotional or educational materials. Lobbying refers to directly influencing the government and its leaders, and there's 2 types of lobbying. There's direct lobbying, which is communicating your views to a legislator or government employee who may develop legislation. And in order for this communication to be considered direct lobbying, it must refer to a specific legislation and must reflect a view on that legislation. For example, if you were to ask Senator Smith to vote no on Senate Bill 123, or ask Congresswoman Jones to vote yes on H.R. 456, this would be an example of direct lobbying. Grassroots lobbying is trying to influence the public to express a particular view to their legislators about a specific legislative proposal. To be considered grassroots lobbying, the communication must also refer to specific legislation, it must reflect a view of that legislation, and it must encourage the recipient of the communication to take action with respect to that legislation. It must also provide information on how the public can contact decision makers. So most political commercials are examples of grassroots lobbying, like a 30-second ad on TV that urges you to contact Congress to vote no on S789, and then provides the general telephone numbers for the House and Senate switchboards. That would be an example of grassroots lobbying. As our society becomes more connected and national issues can impact local ones and vice versa, Many people are getting involved in the political process in addition to casting their votes. At the national level, there are perennial issues that can concern scientists and motivate people to action. But as you get involved, it's important to remember to stay as impartial as you can. I know it seems strange to say, but you have to keep your politics out of the political process. Staying focused on your goal, either through advocacy or lobbying, to achieve the change you seek is the way to go forward. You need to be able to apolitically explain your position, sticking to the facts and impacts, providing data, and telling personal stories. This is going to be your best way to affect change. But before you get started, you should do some basic research. You can visit house.gov and senate.gov to find out who your senators and representatives are for both your home and your office. A few clicks will lead you to their personal websites. Get the phone numbers for the DC office and for the local office closest to you. You can also find a treasure trove of information on these websites. Look at their issue statements. This gives you an indication of the priorities of the Senate or the congressman. A review of their recent press releases gives you an idea of what they like to promote in their office. You can confirm what their committee assignments are, and you can also see how they voted on issues that might be related to yours. Even the pictures and graphics used across the website can give you an impression of the office's agenda. Also make note of any caucuses or groups they're affiliated with. You're looking not only for issue-specific information like how they voted, but also for personal opportunities to make a connection with that office. Did they attend the same university where you did your undergrad? Is she an Army veteran like your grandpa? If you can find a way to make an extra connection with the office, you should capitalize on it. This is Congresswoman Barbara Lee's personal member website. Note that she has made it easy to follow her on social media and sign up for what she calls Lee Mail, email updates from her office. Even the image shows her active in the community, in a multicultural, multi-generational crowd. In navigating through her website, she makes it easy to see what issues are important to her, and her press announcements are concisely ordered to make finding news about her easy. Okay, so you found your representative and you found your senator, you visited their personal web pages, and you are ready to reach out. Keep in mind, there are only a handful of members of Congress that have a science background, so it's important that you help the rest of Congress, and all of them, cast votes that are based on sound science. That a constituent like you took the time to inform them will carry considerable weight when it comes time to vote on a legislative issue of concern. But before you do so, take the time to clarify your issue. Hone your message and determine what it is you want. Do you want them to vote for a certain way on a piece of legislation, or do you need them to address a budget cut? Figure out what you need them to do before you start talking with them. Keep your message clear and concise, avoid too many technical terms or acronyms, and be prepared to answer what I call the why questions. Why is this important to you or your organization? Why is it important to the senator or the congresswoman? And why is action necessary on this issue? Make sure you have your preferred email and telephone number ready to give out. There are several ways that you can communicate with Congress. Let's go through the most widely used methods and how they can be used to raise the profile of your issue. Calling your congressman or senator is the easiest thing to do. Find their number on their House.gov or Senate.gov website and give them a call. Better yet, when you call, ask to speak to the staff person that handles science issues for that member. Speak to that person directly or leave a voicemail. You can also contact the local office and ask to speak to the staff person who handles constituent services and deliver your message to them. Make note of any names of the individuals with whom you speak and ask for a direct line if you can get it. Sending an email is also a great low-barrier activity to establish contact with your representatives. Once you have the name of a staff contact, the standard format for emails in the House is firstname.lastname@mail.house.gov, and for the Senate, it's firstname_lastname @nameofthesenator.senate.gov. There are a few exceptions in the case of duplicate names, so when in doubt, feel free to ask the receptionist of that office for clarification. I'd like to tell you to make use of the subject line in your email. Be specific and use that space to convey information. For example, constituent request for meeting July 15th, or please support HR 1234. Here's an example of an email to request a meeting with a science staffer on behalf of a constituent. I note the reason for the email in the subject line. I introduce myself directly and make my request for a meeting, giving a little bit of background about who I am and why we're requesting the meeting. Sending a letter is a more formal way to communicate with your elected officials. As we move towards a more digital society, more and more emails are being kept as permanent record of communication, but letters are still archived. And a formal letter will typically receive a formal letter in response. Keep these tips in mind as you compose your letter. Always address them with their title. Use senator or congressman. And make sure that you're contacting the appropriate chamber for specific legislation. A piece of legislation that begins with HR indicates that it's in the House of Representatives, while a piece of legislation that begins with S means it's in the Senate. And just like in the email, take a sentence or two to introduce yourself and provide your connection to the office. For example, my name is Elizabeth Duffy, and I'm a zoologist with the Brookfield Zoo, a mother of 3 high school students, and a resident of Barrington, Illinois. Make sure that within the first paragraph or two, you've clearly identified why you're writing the office. I'm writing you with my concerns on HR 1234 and the potential detrimental impact it will have on secondary school physical science programs. You always want to provide a reason why. Why is this important to you? Why is it important to them as their elected official? And why is it important to your community? Helping them see the why action is important to giving them direction on what you need for them. Include ways for the offices to get in touch with you. Telephone, email, etc. And if you have websites that point to more information, you should include that as well. Thank them for taking the time to consider your input, or thank them for their service, and use a formal closing like sincerely or respectfully. Include your full name and title if it's appropriate. It's important to note that since the anthrax attacks in the Senate in 2001, all physical mail sent to Congress is collected off-site and irradiated before it's delivered. This can delay the letter by several days. Another option is to formally compose the letter, but then send it by fax instead. The biggest investment is to meet in person with your congressperson or senator, both in terms of investment of your time and your potential costs, but it also has the biggest payout. You can meet with your elected officials in their local offices in your home state, or you can venture to DC to meet with them there. Keep in mind that congressional offices are set up like small businesses, with each staffer handling specific but multiple functions. The background work you've done should help you identify the right person with whom to meet, and ideally you have made an initial contact by phone or by email. If you choose to meet with the district office staff, they are typically more focused on constituent concerns affecting people at the local level. There may not be a staffer that handles national issues like the federal budget or pending legislation, but at the local office they can still take your constituent concerns and direct them to the right people. However, the chance to meet with a member themselves is greater in the local office, as they plan these district work weeks to interact with their constituents. District work weeks are when Congress is in recess, meaning they leave DC and return home. You can call the local office to confirm when the member will be coming home and plan your visit accordingly. If you are coming to DC, taking a quick look at the calendar is also helpful. There are times when Congress can be predictably busy, when a new budget is introduced, at the close of the fiscal year in September, and before they leave for long recess breaks like August or December. These high work times make greater demands on the staff times, and the rapid and somewhat unpredictable scheduling of votes can make everyone's schedule incredibly variable. But all is not lost. Staff in DC have the same commitment to constituent concerns as the local office does, and they will make every effort to accommodate you. When trying to plan a meeting, call in advance, explain who you are and why you'd like to meet. If you have a specific date in mind, tell them that up front. If the identified staff person can't meet with you, go ahead and ask if you can meet with another staff person who can relay your message and issue. And be flexible here too. You may not get to meet with the member or your preferred staffer, but the goal is to establish contact and make a personal connection. Also, be flexible where you meet. You'd be surprised at how small and cramped congressional offices are, and meetings may take place in the reception area, in an open conference table, or even in the hallway. This is not a reflection of you or your issue. It's just a reality of the schedule and the space constraints of the staff person. Another way to make contact with your congressperson is by attending a state event like a town hall or a listening session. This is a good way to find out who you should be talking with and possibly make a first contact with the congressman or senator themselves. But this is not the time or place to discuss in depth your particular issue or concern. Lately, events like these have been more aggressive or accusatorial, with the congressman needing to take a more defensive stance. This is not the best time to influence or attempt to persuade them. What it does is allow you to use that event to make reference to future communications, as in, when I spoke with you at the town hall on June 24th, you recommended I contact you. A majority of members have ways that you can sign up to receive updates, push data options if you like signing up for email updates. But you can also follow them on their social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Bear in mind, these accounts are usually managed by a staffer, so you're obviously not hearing directly from your congresswoman's mouth. But since they are curated by a staffer, they're monitored quite frequently, and retweets, shares, or updates are noted. Connecting with the offices over social media is a great way to establish back-channel communications opportunities. Call out the staffer with whom you met, saying that he did a great job. Thank the senator for voting for or against some issue that might be tangential to yours. Pose a question using their official hashtag and see what sort of response you get. All of these touch points help create your connections within the office and show that you are interested and involved, a resource that they can count on. But beware, keep these interactions positive. Don't become a troll. Also, remember that once you connect with them over social media, they now have access to your digital profile. There's something to be said for separating your personal and professional digital lives. These one-touch sign-up buttons on the homepage of Congressman Lipinski make it super easy for you to connect with him over social media. Look for these on the House.gov or Senate.gov landing page for each individual member. So, regardless of how you make a connection with your member's office, you're going to want to have a document that speaks for you when you're not there, an informational and promotional piece, if you will. The format and layout of your summary document can vary and be based on personal preferences, but make sure it includes a message. Clearly state what it is you want or who you are. Are you attempting to educate or inform them on an issue? Are you persuading them to vote in a certain way? Take time to clarify this before you get started. Provide a bit of background, just the highlights of the issue or your organization. In this part, you can include analysis or facts and data, but use it sparingly. Also, again, provide the why. Why is this important to you or your organization? Why is it important to the senator? Why is action necessary on this issue? This is a great place to tell a personal story. And have a conclusion sentence that sums it all up. If you can include a visual element, great. People process images 60 times faster than words, so using impactful images, graphs, or charts that support your message and story is a great idea. And don't forget to include your contact information so they can follow up. You want to ensure that this document can be easily shared, in case the contact you're dealing with wants to forward it to another office or another staffer. So make sure you can easily attach it to an email and that it can be viewed on different operating systems and platforms. Usually, saving it as a PDF is the best bet. This is an example of an individual leave behind from a participant of a congressional visits day. She wasn't necessarily looking for support on a specific legislation, but was conveying the overall importance of federal funding to geosciences and hoping to develop contacts within this office. As a student, she was able to discuss her study and showcase how it was important to the congressional district. This is the backside of her document. It includes additional visual elements that relay information to support the text, but it also breaks up the page so it doesn't read like a report. It has hot links to the source documents or additional information on the referenced issues, so the reader has more questions or wants more information, they can go get it themselves. So now we know who is making policy decisions, how we can impact those decisions through lobbying and advocacy, and what sort of things to say and use to convey our issues. I want to leave you with some final thoughts as you begin to think about what issues are important to you and if or how you want to get involved. Anytime you contact your representative is a good time to do so, but there are times that will be better achieving your goals, and knowing when and where you can have the most impact is important. As a rule, it's always better to contact your representatives at the start of the process before it gets too far along. This is true for budget issues and also for authorizing legislation. For budget issues, the process for next year's budget starts only a few months after the previous budget is passed. It's best to contact your Congress with budget issues and concerns in late February or early March. This is when the budget is typically known and congressmen and senators are asking their constituents to weigh in on the proposed budget. Many offices have deadlines for budget requests that are typically at the end of March. You can, however, continue to influence the budget process throughout the entire legislative efforts of hearings and subcommittee and full committee markups. And ultimately, the budgets will be voted on by the House and Senate. You can continue to voice your issues up until the very end. For new authorizing legislation, that's an ongoing process that takes time. Here, consistency is the key. The need to keep the issue in the forefront of the members' agenda and to keep all relevant parties, from agencies to stakeholders, energized and continue to raise the issue is the focus. For renewing authorizing legislation, the process should typically start about 18 months before the program is scheduled to end. And know where your issue is best addressed, at the local level or in DC. If it's a localized concern, you will most likely have better results by working with the district offices. If it's a national issue, like annual budgets, DC is the office you want to engage. There is a split between local offices and district offices on duties and responsibilities, so target your efforts accordingly. The goal is to build a long-term relationship with your congressional delegation, so regular contact with them is important. You want to emphasize local concerns. One of your biggest assets is you understand how things are working at the local level. Members and their staffs are always eager to hear how federal programs and funding are important to your department and institution. This is your chance to relay that information. Lobbying with real-life experience is your most persuasive tool. Make sure you include in your discussion how funding from the NSF or USGS or the Office of Science at DOE impacts your department and institution. Present yourself as a science resource within your area of expertise. You want them to see you as a subject matter expert for your science and to think of you when they have a question. Make sure you indicate that you are available to answer any follow-up questions. And try to think of different ways that you can engage the office. Invite them to the lab or for a site visit if you're doing something unusual or compelling. Send them a news article that you think they might find interesting if it relates to your issue. If you have the chance to participate in Congressional Visits Day events, I encourage you to do so. These events bring together like-minded scientists, educators, industry leaders, and students to partake in an organized series of Capitol Hill meetings. The ability to show strength in numbers is compelling, and the opportunity to work with different scientists and meet with additional congressional offices is incredibly valuable. And have a summary document. Remember, this document is what will speak for you when you're not there. Make sure it says what you want it to say. People think meeting with the congressman or senator is best, but oftentimes the staff person has a better understanding of your issue and will have more time to listen and strategize with you. This staff person will report up to the chief of staff and ultimately the member on your issue and concern, so you want to have them on your side. Set a reminder on your calendar to check in monthly. If you find an interesting article on your issue, go ahead and forward it. Remember, making the first contact is easy, but consistency is the key. And don't give up. You are not a nag or an annoyance when you call and email them to follow up on your issue. Staff are super busy and schedules are in flux. Many times your contact may handle multiple issues for the office, but stay positive and keep inquiring. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you found it informative. Good luck and get out there and advocate for your science.